Hey, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Right. We're in session, right? It's informal? We're in session, okay. Thanks for joining us today. We are under management and budget. Today we are going to talk about item FY 2017 property tax levy resolution. I do not believe there's a formal presentation other than we all worked extremely hard to get to this point. So a lot of work, a lot of hours. So thank you, Sandy, and the budget staff and all the agencies for working with us to get to the point of today where we vote on the tax. So,
Mr. Chairman, if there's not any questions regarding this item, which I wouldn't expect because we set a budget now, we have to pay for it, and this is the proper way to do it. But if you're ready for a motion, I would be prepared to make it.
sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
And with that, Mr. Chairman, I move the approval of the property tax levy resolution, which sets the primary and/or secondary tax rates for Maricopa County, the flood control district of Maricopa County, and the Maricopa County Library District, as well as tax rates or levies for the county improvement districts, and pursuant to the direction of each governmental entity, levy the amounts of taxes and set the resulting tax rates for each as set forth in the Maricopa County 2016 tax levy. And pursuant to the statute, direct the treasurer to collect taxes as required by law from the persons listed on the tax roll. And all of that is more specifically detailed in the tax levy resolution printed in the agenda as item number 1.
Great.
Second the motion, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. Motion's unanimous. Thank you guys very much for, again, your hard work in this. Okay, moving on to item number under 2. Under management and budget, there's a presentation today about the economic forecast. The presentation today is by Mr. Elliott Pollock. Thank you for being here.
Glad to be here. I appreciate it.
We always look forward to your presentations, and this is a big one.
Well, this might be an exception, but let me start by saying that if you've been waiting for the boom, this is it. This is as good as things are going to get in this cycle. And as the cycle gets older, as you get deeper into the expansion, the risks of a slowdown nationally become more real. If you take a look at both major parties' platforms, neither party, both parties have things in their platform that would be negative for the growth in the economy. One party in terms of taxes, one party in terms of essentially starting a trade war. So you got to hope that they don't live up to their platforms. So it's really time to be cautious. Again, expansions don't die of old age. They die because something happens. There's an exogenous shock. There's an asset bubble. The Fed policy is too tight. None of those exist right now, but is just like as a person gets older, they're more subject to disease and their bones become more brittle. That's what happens in expansions. The reason that I want you to consider this, okay, oops, sorry. Thank you. Good point. The reason I want you to consider this is that retail sales are the one portion of the economy that are not acting well, and that's where you get your money. Now, we don't know if it's because people are buying more services and fewer things, fewer clothes, less electronics, or the data's wrong. We don't know what's going on. And until we do, you've got to play things cautiously. And the reason is that, as Sandy will get into, there have been certain legal decisions and there are certain things pending that essentially could wipe out your reserves. And so a small shortfall, which normally wouldn't be a problem, become a big problem if you don't have reserves. And therefore, you have to play things close to the vest. Let's talk about these unknowns. First, over the last 2 decades, my company our job was to help the county stay out of trouble. And we think we've had reasonable forecasts. You've had an excellent staff. And the Board of Supervisors has, to my experience, always been realistic and thoughtful about things. Well, again, what we have is a situation where there's a potential slowdown in economic activity out there. There's a diminution in the contingency funds over which you have no control because they're court mandated. And the retail sales growth essentially is lower than we expected. Originally, our forecast was fine, but over the last few months, you can see that retail sales have slowed. Again, it's the one portion of the economy that has slowed, and unfortunately, it's where you get your money. So it's an issue. So when you add this to how late we are in the cycle, we think it's time to play things close to the vest. And it's our recommendation that you think about using the pessimistic forecast at this time. Now, let me talk about the economy as a whole. Again, it's still going, and again, for Arizona, this is the boom. If we had normal population flows, you'd get the 5.5% employment growth. You're not getting normal population flows. The only thing I see nationally that's a problem is inventory sales ratios are out of line. The good news, if there is good news there, is that the excess inventory remains almost entirely in autos and that the auto fleet continues to age. So that suggests that people will be replacing their cars. I'll just throw this in. The one, I hate to say there's a surefire indicator because the first time you say that, it doesn't work anymore. But literally, before every recession since the end of World War II, the yield curve has inverted. And the yield curve is not yet inverted, so I don't think we're at the end yet. But we do believe it's time to be cautious. Consumer debt burden, we've been through this before. This is the financial obligations ratio. This is how much of people's income they used to pay for previously accumulated debt. That's in good shape. Consumers seem to be in good shape. It's down to where it was in the 80s. Consumer credit, the upper line is basically two things. It's auto loans and student loans. The bottom line is credit cards. And so people have not been relying on credit cards as much as they have been historically. Consumer liquidity is still good. Confidence is back to normal. No irrational exuberance anywhere in the economy as we could see. Although some people are worried about the stock market, I think it's too early to worry about that. Net worth's improving. Real income is up. And again, that's good news. Inflation remains low. Oil prices, although they're bouncing around, they're bouncing at a level that really is much lower than where they've been. There's no capacity issues anywhere in the economy. Things aren't tight. The government isn't a drag on the economy. The Fed is still expansive. So these things are all positive. Get to the next one. Housing prices are up, and this is good news. But to give you some perspective, I know these numbers are small, so maybe you could look at your sheets. Really, the economy, this is the slowest economy in terms of growth by a long shot that we've ever had. This is the slowest expansion we've ever had. So far, this expansion has grown at an annual rate of 2.1%. That's way lower than virtually any other expansion in history. In fact, it is lower than any other expansion in history by a long shot. Now, there's reasons for this. It has to do with higher taxes, oppressive and unsteady regulation, barriers to free trade, and there's a word missing, again, monetary policy that essentially has made getting a loan difficult. So again, we think you're going to continue with this subpar expansion, slow intermediate term growth, and but again, let's talk about Phoenix. Phoenix is 73% of all the jobs in the state, but since the expansion started, it's been 86% of all the jobs that have occurred since the recession ended. Essentially, you have Greater Phoenix, you have some activity in Greater Tucson, and the balance of the state is sort of not there. Okay, And again, the states had a significant recovery. It's only when you compare ourselves to pre-2007 recoveries that we seem weak. And again, it's two different worlds. Again, take a look at these numbers. Again, we were first or second, except during recession periods, for really decades. And then after 2007, it's been a lot different. Now, so far this year, we're seventh, which is good, but not where we were historically. Same thing with Greater Phoenix. There are 32 major employment markets in the country. A major employment market has more than 1 million jobs. Again, usually first, second, or third, except during recessions we go down a little. This time around, it's been a lot different. We are back to fourth so far this year, so Phoenix is doing well. So why are things different? Well, again, it has to do with the nature of the recession and the subpar recovery that has caused a slowdown in population growth. And so that's a big deal, and here's why it's a big deal. Historically, we come out of recession with a very low unemployment rate. How low? Well, I'll show you in a second, but basically the unemployment rate now, after an extensive recovery, is where the peak was in unemployment during past recoveries. So we've got a long way to go. We also create a lot of jobs. Well, with a low unemployment rate, and you create a lot of jobs, you suck in a lot of people from outside. They come here to fill those jobs, but they also bring their own demand for goods and services, which creates more jobs, and it kind of spirals upwards. This time around, that hasn't happened. Here's the unemployment rate. We are back to essentially where we were at the last two recoveries' peak in unemployment. So again, while it's not nearly as tight as it has been in previous cycles. Again, the boom usually occurs when you get down to low unemployment rates and you start really sucking people in to fill the jobs that are being created. This time around, we're not creating nearly as many jobs, and because of that, we are not getting as many people here, and therefore you're not getting the ripple effect of the demand for goods and services that those people would bring with them. Unemployment, we have yet to reach the average of our long-term trend. And take a look at where the jobs are, because this is a problem for the country as a whole. What we've done is we've basically gone from a manufacturing society to a service society. In 1975, about 22% of the jobs nationally and about 18% in Greater Phoenix were manufacturing. That's down to about 9% nationally and about 6% locally. On the other hand, professional and business services have gone from about 8% nationally and about 9.5% locally to about 14% nationally and about 17% locally. And education and health services gone from about 7 to about 15%. So the problem with that is this. Manufacturing jobs pay above average wages. And they are very good jobs, and we compare very well with the U.S. as a whole. In fact, on average, we pay 113% of the average U.S. wage in manufacturing. And we're trading that for jobs that are lower wage and where we are not as competitive. In terms of professional and business services, we pay about 80% of the U.S. average, and education and health services about 104%, 105%, as opposed to 113%. And as a result, wages relative to the U.S. aren't going up as rapidly here as they did historically. And that trend is not likely to change. Now, also population flows. This is a national phenomenon, and therefore it hurts the people who are most dependent on population flows. If you take 2001 through 2005, compare it to 2011 to 2015, the total number of movers from abroad, from other states and from other counties within the state, down about 25%. So again, fewer people are moving and our capture rate is down, and that's because we're not creating as many jobs. Let's skip these and get to the bottom line. How quickly is this going to recover? Well, it's slowly. These are three forecasts. They're ours, they're the University of Arizona's, and they're the Department of Administration's. And again, what they're showing is that population will grow, but we're not getting back nearly to the 3 3.5% that we'd have at the previous booms. And in fact, the Department of Administration expects that basically 2% will be about it in this cycle. That is enough for about 20,000 homes, and that really is good news, because if you take a look at the parade of horribles, every one of them's getting better. Negative equity, fewer people are behind the 8 ball in terms of negative equity. In terms of foreclosures, the blue line is the actual foreclosures. The red line is 7 years later, because that's the lockout period if you want to get an FHA loan. And you can see that the next few years, a lot of those people will be eligible for loans again. That's good news. Mortgage credit availability, and this is a good reason why you should never believe charts economists show you. This is from 2012 forward, and it shows that mortgage credit availability is getting better. Let me go back a few more years. This is what it looks like from 2000 forward. Mortgage credit availability is essentially very low by any historic standard, and that's a problem that's going to go away only slowly. Let's go to other problems. Millennials. The problem there is simply, and there's more millennials than there are baby boomers, they're not getting married. They are putting it off. Males to almost 30, females to over 28. And so if you compare it to the baby boomers, they're single for about 6 or 7 years longer. In fact, in 1960, almost 2/3 of people 18 to 33 were married. It's down to 28%. And when you delay marriage, you delay buying houses, you delay having kids, and you delay buying all the stuff you need for the house that you need because you have a kid. That will eventually change, but it's going to take a while. And here's one reason. Student loan debt has quadrupled, but the real issue is this, that if you take a look at surveys, the number one reason why millennials are having trouble saving for a down payment is student loan debt. That eventually changes as well. When they get into their 30s, they will invariably follow their parents to the suburbs. But that's down the road a piece. So what we're going to have is this. Housing might get to 18,000 units this year, maybe 20,000 next, but that's about where it's going to be. We're not going to get much above that until millennials really come back. Apartments. The demographics for apartments have never been better in the history of the world. This is millennials, average age of 26, lagged, and you can see that for the next decade or two, there's just a huge number of millennials who are reaching 26, which is apartment age. There's a huge number of baby boomers reaching 65. Many of those will sell their home and live in an apartment off the equity they had in their home. And millennials will be in apartments again for 6 to 7 years longer than baby boomers were. So the demographics are terrific. Also, vacancy rates are low and are likely to get lower. As far as office is concerned, actually the office market is improving fairly rapidly. By 15% is the magic number that usually has spurred booms in office. Although there's a lot of construction going on now, the boom really is probably late 17, early 18. I won't even go to those numbers, other than say there's 1.8 million under construction now, and that will pale by comparison once you get to the boom. Industrial is also strong. Vacancy rates are low, and there's a lot of construction, but the absorption has been greater than the change in inventory, which suggests there's a lot of demand out there. Retail is the one weak area. I threw this in because I thought this was funny. But, vacancy rates are coming down, but they're still very high by historic standards. There is very little construction going on, and zero spec construction. And again, partly the excess supply, partly because people are buying services rather than goods, much more so than they have historically. Plus, you have the competition of the internet. Retail is going to be under pressure for quite some time. All right, so how does this end? Again, there's no traditional boom where you end up with 4.5%, 5.5% employment growth. you're probably going to get to about where we are now. This is it. This is the boom. This is as good as it gets. Let's take this in terms of what I talked about earlier. Again, we can't tell well in advance when a recession is going to occur. This recovery is getting old. It's right now the fourth longest post-war recovery, so you've got to keep your eyes open. If we take the pessimistic scenario, which is that retail sales stay lousy, there'll be about $10 million difference between the most likely and the pessimistic, and that would have been annoying, but it would have been not that big a deal were there reserves. Without reserves, it's a big deal. And therefore, you have to play things close to the vest. This is the most likely forecast, which is things just trend out. And as you can see, we had retail sales in the 4.5% range for the next several years. This is the pessimistic scenario, where there are a lot less, and we actually have them declining in 2019, fiscal year 2019. And the reason we're bringing this to you now is simply this John F. Kennedy quote, which is probably the best one I think he ever made. The time to repair the roof is when the sun is shining. You can't wait until it's raining to fix the roof. And quite frankly, this is as shining as it's going to get. And with that, I will be glad to answer questions or throw it to Sandy. And I apologize for being the bearer of what can't be considered good news, but it is what it is.
Do you need a
Andy.
Do you know a good roofer? Because I came home from vacation and and you're right. That one hit me because you forget about it when it's not raining. But I do appreciate the heads up, and it seems like you mentioned 20 years. That's gone by pretty fast. But I for one have valued your guidance and your assistance all these years, and I think it's better to be forewarned there, I think, than anything else, and we'll take proper action. I think, difficult as it was the last couple of years, we've slowly begun to build those reserves, and I think if we can be smart going forward, we'll be okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Pollack. As always, very informative. I love your. No one has a better PowerPoint than Elliot Pollack. I can be on the record here, especially with some of those captions. But I was sharing with Supervisor Barney during the PowerPoint presentation, and that we automatically assume that we have to get to good times before you can dip again. I think that's maybe we're pre-wired that way. That we're going to come out of this recovery. We're going to get to back to normal, if you will, and then that's when you have a downturn, and that's not always the case. And I think that's what this is explaining. It's not, and so that tells me two things, Mr. Chairman. One, that yes, we did have wisdom in making sure that we had these contingency funds and these reserve accounts. But two, that our other colleagues that may not be here today, when I mean by that is our fellow electeds, whether it be the recorder or the county attorney or the sheriff on down the line, that they're going to have to understand this too. Because what that means is I think we have to roll up our sleeves in this next budget cycle even more so to protect against it. And I know that, Mr. Pollack, you and your colleagues have shared with us that we're forward thinking as a county. We should be as the fourth largest county. But it makes the job harder too at times. And so those are my takeaways, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank Mr. Pollack for the great job he does on behalf of the county.
Great, thank you. Steve, anything?
No, this is good. Thank you.
Elliot, just one question I have, and I think I've asked it before. When do you make this presentation to the state legislature and the new people coming into there, and also they'll be involved in new budget committees and issues? It's one thing for us to make sure that we are forward thinking and doing our best and looking to see when the storm is coming. But we are a subdivision of state government, and they make financial decisions as well.
I think sometime in the next month or two, I'm at JLBC, which is where they, October.
In October?
Yes,
Okay.
early October.
Okay, very good. I just wanted to
Yeah.
voice my opinion on that
And
a
I
little bit.
appreciate it, but that's where, we're there 2-3 times a year, and that's where they get their input.
Is it always JLBC, or do you actually talk to some of, do you have a group with the electeds and things? That's it?
It's usually through JLBC. Once in a while, I'll speak to the legislature, but the only scheduled things are JLBC.
Okay.
Legislature makes up their own rules.
Yeah.
They do.
Oh, lovely. Okay.
With your own projections.
Yeah.
Their
they
own
do.
projections. Very good. Then thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
If there's no
Thanks,
other
Elliot.
questions, thank you, Elliot.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, item 3 is going into executive session, which is scheduled directly after this meeting. So I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Thanks for all of you for joining us.
I'll do a motion to go into exec session.
Motion for an exec.
Second the motion.
Motion is second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you for joining us.
I did get a bid, that means we get a couple more bids.